Tonight on Reel to Reel, meet local religious who teach social responsibility from the pulpit and in the boardroom.
And we'll meet some Boston teens who have found a way out of troubled lives.
And we'll show you where the Catholic Church in America got its start.
Hello, I'm Sean Hughescamp.
And I'm Monsignor Charles Meinau. Welcome to this edition of Reel to Reel. This was the scene last April 27th in front of General Electric's office complex in Philadelphia, where a handful of sisters conducted a prayer vigil and distributed leaflets in a public display of their opposition to GE's involvement in nuclear weapons production. The Sisters of St. Francis, who organized this protest through their Committee for Responsible Investment and joined by 43 other religious organizations, were trying to use their clout as stockholders in General Electric Corporation to persuade GE to rethink its policy of accepting military contracts. With an estimated $7 billion invested in the stocks of public corporations, religious communities use their dividends to support their pastoral works both here and abroad, and they also use their rights as stockholders to call attention to serious, important investment responsibilities. Joining us tonight on Crosstalk are three religious who have full-time commitments to their own pastoral work, yet they are also involved in the corporate investment. Please meet Sister Eleanor Rice, President of the Philadelphia Area Coalition for Responsible Investment, Father Claude Lenahan, Chairman of the Franciscans East Coast Corporate Responsibility Committee, and Sister Margaret Sullivan, who is a member of the Sisters of St. Francis Committee for Responsible Investment. Sister Eleanor and Father and Sister are glad to have you all here, especially to give us a lead-in to why would your community be involved in such a thing as the Corporate Responsibility Coalition?
Well, about 10 years ago, our society became involved in examining our investments along with other religious groups, both Catholic and Protestant. And we thought that it would be a shame if we who are pledged to peace and justice and the works of mercy should be taking dividends and using them for those works without examining the practices of the corporations. And so we joined the regional group Mid-Atlantic Coalition for Responsible Investment. We affiliated ourselves with the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility in New York, and we've gone on to negotiate, dialogue, and file resolutions with the corporations where their practices were not exactly what we felt they should be.
Father Claude, how did your committee get involved in this?
Well, much the same way. We wanted some expression of our social responsibility of those financial holdings. We plugged in to the Mid-Atlantic Coalition, which now has become the Philadelphia Area Coalition. And that we also now are into the national level, which is the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility. That's out of New York and made up of 170 religious communities and 12 dioceses, plus 17 of the major Protestant denominations. So it's an ecumenical movement or group that we work with on this whole matter.
Sister Margaret, you and Father Claude are both from the Franciscan root and charism. How does this jibe with the spirit of Francis, the idea of the investment, or even to have funds to invest?
Mm-hmm. I think it's much in keeping with Franciscan philosophy in that over the course of the years there's been an awful lot of responsible stewardship. As in many of our congregations, I believe that there's been some very fine management. So we're at this point in our history where we can use those funds not only to invest in corporations where we can also see what they're doing socially, but at the same time garner some financial return which would help further the works of our congregation as well as offer assistance to other groups.
Having seen the protest at GE, we also have to be concerned about the area of boycott and protest. There is a difference, I'm sure, here.
There are some groups that are being boycotted. For example, we're familiar with the Nestle boycott because Nestle has decided not to honor the WHO regulations regarding the sale of infant formula. But we do not initiate any kind of boycott. We may support it if there's a matter there with which we agree. But our work is mostly dialoguing with the corporations and trying to exert our collective strength to see some change brought about.
What are some of the issues that you've brought corporate attention to?
Well, besides what you saw in the initial picture, the nuclear weapons issue with GE, we've been involved in a number of other things. For example, I have filed with Chase Manhattan Bank on a weatherization project. We asked them to grant lower than market rate income loans to low-income people so that they could weatherize in the North Bronx. That very shortly will be announced as a fait accompli with a cooperative program between New York City and Chase Manhattan. But that's the kind of thing on the local level that we would be doing.
But as a coalition, you have corporate clout. But then I'm sure many of our viewers have maybe small shares of stocks here and there. What opportunity would they have to do anything about something of this nature?
I think every share owner, even if a person has only one share of stock, needs to seriously look at what their corporation is involved in. So every person, whether it be a person with one share or 10,000 shares, has the same right and responsibility to vote what we call a proxy statement that would come to them as a share owner.
One of the unfortunate things is that if you do not vote, then your shares are automatically voted with management. And this is why we have been trying to encourage so many of the dioceses to join in the effort, not that they must be members of any of the Philadelphia Coalition or any other, but that they would vote their shares with us. Otherwise, if they allow their bankers to vote the shares or they allow them to lapse, then they're voted with management, and they may be in the position of voting in favor of something that they do not agree with.
Well, something you would not agree with, then you would get into the area of divestment. Would you divest everything from a company like that?
No. My particular congregation is involved in the process of divestment at the present time, and what we've decided to do as a committee is that we would divest all but a few shares. And what that would mean is we wouldn't be getting back any great financial returns, but at the same time we would keep the door open for ongoing dialogue with corporations.
I know you're concerned, Father Claude, with the alternative divestments. What are your reaction to that? Where would you go with it?
Well, via alternative investments. We ask that we put our financial resources at the call of low-income and poor people's groups who have little access to credit. And this usually takes the form of low-interest, long-term loans for their basically self-help development projects. And that's sort of a positive aspect of corporate responsibility. The stockholder challenge is kind of adversarial, and this one is helping people on that level to develop themselves. One example is in North Carolina, a number of poor black women had working in a sewing company which stopped production. Well, through religious groups, they were able to buy the company and continue their work. And their management is good, it's local, and they have their own jobs now.
And how does the corporate idea and responsibility bring the religious community to share in some of the profits and benefits of this?
Well, this brings up a point that in religious groups there seem to be two isolated things. Either they are on the one end with blue chip stocks or they are on the other end of donations in charity. And there never seems to be a middle ground for the religious investors, and the alternative investment movement provides funds that allow you to invest, receive a profit, and reinvest. And it becomes like a revolving fund then at the service of those who do not have an opportunity to make investments themselves.
And the profits that you do receive go back into your own community, correct?
And are used for the works that we have. We wouldn't be able to do some of the works that we have without some kind of income. It allows people to work without salary if we have a certain kind of income, but if not, we would have to make sure that everyone was in a paying job that was commensurate with her training and education and all that. But now we're able to be much more free in our ability to take on works of charity and works of mercy.
Also, the retirement funds are a big factor now, and need income.
Certainly the idea of investment calls upon responsibility, and the responsibility is one whereby we not only have the opportunity to make funds, make dividends, and continue to support great works, pastoral or not, but the responsibility which comes from investment means that we're committed to a public morality. We just can't ignore that. And I think it's important for us to understand that Christian morality has gone public. We're long since past the day when I can just take care of my own soul in fear and trembling. I am responsible for more than my next door neighbor brother or my brother around the world. So why don't you think about corporate responsibility and maybe listen some more down the line.
Coming up, we'll visit the site of one of the first Catholic settlements in America. One of the founding tenets of our country was religious freedom, and another one was separation of church and state. In Maryland, the church has joined the state in a project that will hopefully reveal the beginnings of religious freedom and the Catholic Church in America.
They came to the New World packed in the cargo holds of ships. Thousands of young people seeking a better life than they faced in 17th century Europe. Wanting the chance to practice the religion of their choice and to farm their own land, they came to St. Mary's City, the first capital of Maryland, and the first colony to establish the separation of church and state. Today, Southern Maryland bears little evidence of the human drama that gave birth to religious freedom in America. St. Mary's City has become an archaeological site. A few brick foundations, some personal diaries, and thousands of small artifacts are all that is left of this frontier village. Imported ceramics, discarded dinnerware, 17th century sewing scissors and pins, even eggshells that a colonial innkeeper discarded over 300 years ago, each a clue to our past.
We have relatively few 17th century crucifixes from anywhere in the Chesapeake Bay region, and this is one of the only examples. This is a cross that came from the St. John's archaeological site and probably dates before about 1660. It's a piece of cast bronze or brass that has actually survived remarkably well considering it's over 300 years old.
Unlike hundreds of excavations in Virginia, which have produced no religious artifacts, St. Mary's has produced several, revealing that Catholicism was at least tolerated in the town.
And here we have a really remarkable object. This is the only 17th century rosary that we've ever found. And what is particularly fascinating about it is the location of its recovery. It came from the construction trench of the St. John's site.
Since the 18th century, farmers have been raising crops in this field. Plows continually overturn the topsoil, which was fertile, but littered with bricks. These bricks are the only surviving remnants of the first Catholic chapel in America. Archaeologist Gary Stone is leading St. Mary's effort to resurrect the remains of the chapel. In coming months, part of the foundation and a picket fence will mark the area where pioneers first recognized the necessity for religious freedom.
After we've got the foundations accurately located, what we'll do here is set up a baseline of steel bars in the ground, and from that lay out a 10-foot grid over the site. And then we'll systematically pick up artifacts like these and map their distribution over the site, and then follow up by digging and screening the plow dirt to find more artifacts. And when we finish, by plotting where people dropped things in the 17th century, we'll get a much better idea of how these spaces were used. The objects will probably cluster at doorways. For example, around the door of the chapel, I'd expect we'd find broken pieces of smoking pipe where people stood smoking before or after Mass.
Through the combined efforts of church and state, visitors to St. Mary's City will be able to view the site where the struggle for religious freedom eventually became the basis of our nation.
Because you always had to watch out for this one, watch out for that one. You never knew who was going to have a knife, who was going to hurt you, who was going to beat you up.
Like many American cities, Boston is a magnet for thousands of teenagers who run away each year, and it offers them the street life, drugs, crime, prostitution, and other forms of violence. But in that city, some of the lucky runaways have discovered a bridge over troubled waters.
The girl you're looking at was raped by her mother's boyfriend when she was 12 years old. We'll call her Elizabeth.
I never told anybody about it for a while because I was afraid of him, and when I finally did tell my mother about it, she didn't believe me. I felt that, you know, that nobody cared, especially since my mother, you know, told me right to my face that I was a liar, and she took her boyfriend's side. That, I mean, hurt me deeply.
Not long after, Elizabeth tried to commit suicide.
I just didn't care anymore. I just gave up, you know, I had no hope, you know, no faith in people, and so my family, you know, more or less turned against me. They thought I was destroying the family and, you know, breaking up, trying to hurt everybody, you know, which I wasn't trying to do. I was just trying to get people to understand what had happened to me.
Finally, with no one else to turn to, Elizabeth ran away from home. Before long, she ended up on the streets. This young man we will call Billy. Billy was thrown out of his home after his mother's lover, a prison guard, caught him breaking into a car.
He came over, he punched me in the head. Then me and him had a good fight. My mother told me just get out. If I come back, I said, good, I won't. And I left. It was like near winter time. I shouldn't have done that.
He was 13 years old. This girl we'll call Julie. She ran away from home just before she turned 18. She was about to graduate from high school and was holding down a full-time job.
I still don't understand how I ended up down there, but I did. It was the freedom. Sounded good. Get away, don't listen to nobody. All you gotta watch out for is the law. And it was like, freedom at last. I thought it was good, but it really wasn't too great. It was scary.
These are runaways. Each, for their own reasons, have broken away from their families and come to Boston to survive as best they can. Alone, they drift in. They might hang out around the Boston Commons and Panhandle, or if they are willing to be prostitutes, they might quickly find their way to Boston's combat zone. Others just float, waiting for the tide of events to pull them under.
You just never know what's going to happen, you know. It can be, you know, 1 minute, nothing, you know, you're just talking around, you know, talking to, you know, the same old regulars, and then you see out of the corner of your eye somebody who looks, you know, really out of place, and you start talking to them and say, oh, this is somebody from, you know, Keene, New Hampshire or something, you know, lost in the big city, and now it's time to do your job, you know.
Larry's job is to find runaways on the streets and to let them know there's help available if they want it. He tells them about the bridge. Bridge over troubled waters has helped many thousands of wandering and homeless children since it opened its doors in 1970.
It began with the work of a street priest who sort of got a lot of other professionals and paraprofessionals interested in the plight of these young people.
Sister Barbara Scanlon of the Sisters of St. Joseph and others on the staff here offer medical, dental, educational, and counseling services to runaways.
Depends. Sometimes there's been a lot of coke going around too.
That's once in a while.
Jenny Price is one of the counselors at Bridge.
For the most part, they're kids who have been failed by all the significant people in their lives. They tend to come from families where there have been divorces, separations. It's very rare to have a kid coming from an intact family. There's a very, very high rate of alcoholism and drug abuse among the parents.
In Billy's case, his mother would help him get stoned.
And way before I even got kicked out, she used to get me high, 12, 13. The lowest you can get is to practically kill yourself with the drugs, start doing so much drugs and so much drinking that you're really going to start hurting yourself.
Particularly for the kids who are involved in prostitution, almost all of them have had some form of sexual abuse prior to getting involved in the prostitution.
Raped at 12, attempted suicide at 13. Elizabeth was a hooker before she saw her 14th birthday.
Started working on the street and, you know, got involved with pimps and stuff like that. And when I realized, you know, how bad it was and what kind of hell it was doing to me. When I was younger, you know, my mother used to tell me that I was the ideal daughter, the mother's little girl and little helper, and always did good in school. And
once they're out on the streets, many find themselves cut off from all their old support systems, with no place to go.
It was like dead winter. It was cold. 5 in the morning, I'd be up and no one would be around.
These youngsters know from bitter experience that events can move with a terrifying swiftness on the street, and that what happens often happens without any warning.
Because you always had to watch out for this one, watch out for that one. You never knew who was going to have a knife, who was going to hurt you, who was going to beat you up.
For over 10 years, Bridge has been the lifesaver for countless street kids. Other people, including their parents, have rejected them. Most of them have gone through the streets unnoticed until one way or another they arrive at Bridge and the slow, steady process of hauling in the lifeline begins.
They all need to be loved, and a lot of them defend themselves against it by just being so tough and so unlovable.
Most of the kids leave or run away because they feel that their parents don't love them, that they're going to just hurt them and keep hurting them.
like when I used to run away a lot and stuff, like my mother, you know, used to tell me how much I was hurting her, but she didn't understand how much she had hurt me.
When you do run away, you gotta have somebody to talk to communicate for you to your parents.
I think what it takes often is for somebody to intervene, to be able to talk to the parent, you know, about what the child is feeling, and then to convey back to the child, you know, somebody in between who is not involved emotionally.
They were concerned about me. They did want me home, but then they were upset with me. Of course they were hurt, but I had to understand that for myself. And Bridge helped me understand that I was hurting them as well as myself. Go home. Just go home if you can. It's not that bad at home. Even if you get grounded all the time. I used to get that too. Go home.
You know, a lot of times you feel that there's no hope and you have no faith in people, but there's always going to be someone that's going to come along and to restore your faith.
This year, in the United States, over 1 million young people will run away from their homes. Although they will frequently be without a roof over their heads and without food to eat or clothes to wear, what they want above all else is someone to love them, to care about them, to notice them. Bridge Over Troubled Waters does just that, because they believe that even if you give someone in need a cup of water, you've helped God touch that person. At Bridge, they do much more than give young people cups of water. They give them hope for the future.
Like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. Like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down.
Each week when we watch our show, we're reminded of the many people who are helping others on an individual basis.
Individual responsibility is well shown to us by our Holy Father, Pope John Paul II. His efforts to reconcile himself with the man who attempted to assassinate him gives such credibility to his international work. And so the religious communities, in talking about their corporate responsibility as people, bring to that their own personal holiness and apostolates. By the way, any religious communities interested in alternative investments and corporate responsibility can attend a workshop this year, March 15th, hosted by the Franciscan Sisters at their mother house, Our Lady of Angels in Glen Riddle, Aston. The phone number here is 587-3775. We'll be glad to put you in touch if you like.
Next week on Reel to Reel, we'll meet a woman who has discovered unique ministries for herself and her family.
And a priest who ministers to a large family, the Chicago Police Department.
Meet youthful ministers in Rhode Island.
Also, critic Mike Gallagher talks about trends in made-for-TV movies.
And we'll see a park that is a monument to Mary.
As always, we've enjoyed being with you. Good night, and God bless you.
Look forward to seeing you next week. Good night.